I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here we are. It all started on what seemed like a regular afternoon in our quiet neighborhood. I'm the assistant commissioner, a title that carries a lot of responsibility, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that day. My daughter, who is disabled and one of the sweetest souls you'll ever meet, was simply enjoying the front yard like she always does. She wasn't bothering anyone. She wasn't doing anything wrong. But that didn't stop our neighborhood HOA Karen from stepping way out of line. Now, I've had my fair share of run-ins with this woman over the years, noise complaints, parking nonsense, even the length of my grass. But this crossed every line imaginable. In a shocking moment that still leaves me speechless, she actually used zip ties to strap my daughter to our fence. Yes, you heard that right. She took it upon herself to physically restrain a disabled child. I was at work when it happened. My wife called me panicking. I rushed home, and what I saw turned my stomach. I'm a public official. I've dealt with difficult situations, but seeing my own child like that, helpless and scared, was something else entirely. How did a neighborhood dispute turn into this kind of cruelty? What kind of person thinks this is okay? And most importantly, what happens next? Because I can promise you, this story is far from over. When I arrived home, the scene was nothing short of surreal. My daughter, visibly shaken, was sitting on the ground, her hands still bound by the zip ties, staring up at the fence like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. My wife was beside her, trying to comfort her, but even she was in a state of disbelief. This wasn't just a cruel prank or an overzealous attempt at discipline. This was something darker. It was hard to wrap my mind around how anyone could justify this, especially someone like her. The woman behind it all, let's call her Karen, had been a problem for years. As the assistant commissioner, I had always dealt with her complaints, mostly about trivial matters. But she'd always taken it too far, trying to control every little thing in the neighborhood. I never imagined that it would escalate to this level. I tried to stay calm, but inside I was furious. Who did she think she was? What kind of person would do something like this? I immediately reached out to the police, but I could already feel the wheels turning in my head. Something wasn't adding up. There were whispers around the neighborhood about her behavior, rumors that she'd been trying to get people out of the area for months. Could this be part of a bigger scheme? And why, of all people, did she target my family? There was no way I was going to let this go without getting answers. But there was one problem. Karen was no longer at her house. She had vanished. The police came quickly, but the more I explained, the more unsettled I became. They were asking all the right questions. What had triggered her behavior? If there were any previous incidents, who had witnessed it? But as they began their investigation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Karen wasn't exactly a stranger to the authorities, but this time it was different. There was a coldness to her actions, a deliberate malice that I hadn't seen before. It was almost like she had been planning this for some time. The fact that she had disappeared didn't help matters. I checked her house, empty. Her car wasn't in the driveway, and all the lights were off. There was no sign of her, just the eerie feeling that she was watching us from somewhere, waiting for the next move. I tried not to let the paranoia get to me, but it was hard to ignore. People like her didn't just vanish without a reason. As the hours passed, I started to hear more about her history in the neighborhood. Neighbors were opening up, telling stories of strange interactions they'd had with Karen over the years. Apparently, she'd been more than just a loud HOA member. There were rumors that she had a personal vendetta against certain families, mine included. Some even suggested she had been targeting homes for months, trying to push certain people out for reasons no one could clearly explain. But why me? Why my family? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I knew about Karen outside her role as an HOA leader. She didn't have many friends in the neighborhood, and people kept their distance from her. But there was one neighbor, Mrs. Harrington, who might know more. She had lived across the street from Karen for years and always seemed to have an odd way of avoiding her. Maybe she had the answers I was looking for. I decided to pay her a visit, but as I walked out the door, A chilling thought hit me. What if I was being watched? What if Karen was already a step ahead of me? I took a deep breath and stepped out of the house, the weight of the situation pressing on my chest. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer than it should. Every sound felt like it was just a little too loud. The street was quiet, almost too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. My mind raced as I made my way across the lawn, trying to stay calm, to focus on what I needed to do. Mrs. Harrington's house was only a few doors down. She'd always been friendly but cautious around Karen. I had never quite understood their history, but if anyone knew something, it was her. I knocked on her door, my knuckles tapping softly at first, then harder, as the minutes ticked by without an answer. Something wasn't right. Mrs. Harrington always answered the door. Always. I walked around the side of the house, my heart racing, and saw a flicker of movement through the kitchen window. My gut told me to be careful, but I didn't have time for hesitation. I knocked again, this time more urgently. Still no answer. My hand moved toward the door handle, but just before I could twist it, I heard a noise behind me. Footsteps, soft but deliberate. I turned quickly, heart pounding, only to see nothing. The street remained eerily still, but then I saw it. In the reflection of the window, a shadow moved past. It wasn't just any shadow. It was too tall, too familiar. It was Karen. My pulse spiked. Why was she back? How long had she been watching me? And more importantly, where was she now? I stood frozen for a moment, adrenaline surging through me. Every instinct told me to get inside, to call for backup, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not when I was this close. I had to know what Karen was planning, and for that, I needed to get answers, fast. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the shadow in the reflection. It was unmistakably Karen, but something was different this time. She wasn't just watching me, she was waiting. I glanced around, trying to find some cover, but the street was still empty, too empty. The air was thick with tension, like everything was on the verge of unraveling. Suddenly, the kitchen door creaked open, and before I could react, a figure stepped out. It wasn't Karen. It was Mrs. Harrington. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and she looked like she had seen a ghost. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, her voice barely audible, "You shouldn't be here. She's not who you think she is." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what she meant, but the words hit me hard. Mrs. Harrington was shaking, clutching the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "What do you mean? What's going on with Karen?" I asked, my voice urgent, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stepped back, pulling the door closed between us. I didn't have time to waste. I pushed the door open just enough to squeeze through, and Mrs. Harrington's panicked eyes locked onto mine. "You have no idea what you're getting into," she said, barely above a whisper. Then, as if something clicked in her mind, she added, "Karen isn't just targeting you. She's been planning this for months. And it's not just about the HOA. Before I could ask what she meant, the sound of a car engine rolled to life, cutting off her words. I rushed to the window and saw a black SUV pulling out of Karen's driveway. She was leaving again. But this time, it wasn't just her. There was someone else in the car with her. Someone I didn't recognize. I had to act fast. Mrs. Harrington was standing behind me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and urgency. "She's dangerous," she said, almost too quietly. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." And then, as if the world had just tipped sideways, I heard the unmistakable sound of a phone ringing from inside the house, Karen's phone. I turned sharply toward the ringing phone, my heart racing. It felt like everything was falling apart in that moment. Questions without answers, a mystery that had stretched too far, and no one to trust. Mrs. Harrington's face was ghostly pale, her eyes wide in fear. "You need to leave. Now," she urged, but I was already moving toward the sound of the phone. It was too late to back down now. The phone continued to ring, a sharp, echoing sound that filled the silence of the room. I snatched it off the counter without thinking. There was a long pause before a voice crackled through, distorted, as if the speaker was trying to disguise it. "You should have stayed out of this," the voice said, low and chilling. It wasn't Karen. It wasn't anyone I recognized. My mind scrambled for an answer, but it was clear this wasn't over. This had never been about the HOA. It was about something much bigger. "Who is this?" I demanded, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. The voice chuckled, and for a brief moment, the noise on the other end sounded like static. But then I heard something that stopped me cold. "You think Karen is a mastermind? You're wrong. She's just a pawn." A chill ran through me. I glanced back at Mrs. Harrington, who looked horrified. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you know about Karen?" "She's not who she appears to be," Mrs. Harrington whispered, her face contorted in fear. "She's been forced into this. They've been manipulating her. You have no idea what's really going on." Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. They were coming from the front door. I turned just in time to see it swing open, and there she was, Karen, standing in the doorway with a strange, almost vacant look in her eyes. She wasn't alone. A tall, imposing figure stepped in behind her. For a moment, I thought it was over. My mind raced to make sense of it all, but the tall figure raised a hand, and everything around me seemed to freeze. "You were never meant to uncover the truth," the figure said, his voice eerily calm. "Now you know too much." Before I could react, the figure stepped forward, and in a flash, everything went dark. When I woke up, I was back at home. My wife and daughter were safe, but the world around me felt different, warped, like it had shifted while I wasn't paying attention. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out. There was a new message from an unknown number. It was a picture, a map, and a location. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing for sure: Karen's story was only the beginning. I stared at the map on my phone, trying to make sense of it. It was marked with a location, a place I recognized. It was a warehouse on the outskirts of town. The kind of place you'd never think twice about, but now it seemed like the center of everything. It was all too much to process. Who was behind this? Who had been pulling Karen's strings, and why? With no more time to waste, I gathered myself and headed out again, determined to get to the bottom of this. The drive felt endless, my mind racing through every possibility. When I finally arrived at the warehouse, the air felt thick, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. The place was abandoned, or so it seemed at first glance. But I wasn't the only one there. In the shadows, I spotted a figure, Karen, but this time she wasn't alone. The tall figure from before stood beside her, and there was no mistaking the look in their eyes. They weren't just victims of some twisted game, they were part of it. As I approached, they turned to face me, their expressions unreadable. Karen looked different, almost as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "I didn't have a choice," she said softly. "I had to do what they asked." I didn't have all the answers, but I had enough to know this wasn't over. There were still pieces of the puzzle missing, and as I stood there, I realized something. Sometimes, the truth is a far more dangerous thing than the lies we tell ourselves. I left that night with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: the game wasn't over. It was only just beginning.